Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the talk about some reading and thinking about reading comprehension with kids today. I'm Pam Gallant, member of the elementary program team, and happy that we have this time to just think about reading for a little bit. And I'm partnered with Teresa Lopetrone today, so she's going to be running the chat. She's always my trusty companion here and voicing some ideas along as we go through our session. And we invite you to pose your questions in the chat if you're interested in that. You can come off mic if you'd like and ask a question. We'd appreciate hearing your thoughts and wonderings as we go through today's session. Just that the last few people roll in. And we do have our friend Rod in the background. He's running the Zoom sessions for us. So these are being recorded. And Rod has always been looking after us at LKDSB for our sessions. And so we actually do have a YouTube channel called LKDSB Zoom PD. So anything that we've recorded with Rod's help is stored there. So you'll be able to access that anytime, or if you have a friend that already did some learning today and thought, oh, I'll check the reading later. Yes, you will be able to do that. You good to go, Teresa? Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land in which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. These Indigenous nations, known as the Anishinaabe and the Lenape, agreed through the ancestral languages to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, these responsibilities and obligations extend to all peoples. And this artwork, it was created by Moses, and many of you may know Moses, who is a person that shares his craft of art and Indigenous knowledge with us through learning to paint sessions. And I know next week, Nicole Gooding has sent out some information that Moses is going to be available to do some painting with classrooms again next week. So check your emails for that. So today we are going to be thinking about reading, and we're going to start our conversation about reading comprehension and ground ourselves in two kind of ways of thinking about how students acquire reading skills. Is that Scarborough's reading rope analogy, and then we have the benchmark assessment system. There's a system of strategic actions. So what are we doing as we think while we read? And then once we kind of get beyond that little bit of common language piece, comparison piece, we'll move on to, if we have done some reading assessments, where to next? So how might we build students' comprehension, understanding of the text with the information we have gained? So please, again, if you have questions, pop them in the chat for Teresa and I to continue to discuss. So first of all, I want to think about, we have two lands we're going to talk about today. So the benchmark reading assessment, and the Scarborough's reading rope. So you may have been hearing lots of buzz about these two themes or ways of talking about reading. And basically they're symbols to help us make sense of the very complex thing about learning how to read. And as we are readers, how do we make sense of text as we read more challenging texts, things for reading enjoyment, things to learn. So if we think about the benchmark assessment system, it's organized by a wheel. So this round graphic here. And the Scarborough's reading rope uses a rope to share their understanding of reading, how we become increasingly strategic with our reading, increasingly automatic with our reading. So if we think about the wheel first, it's structured around that thinking within the text, thinking about the text, and thinking beyond the text. So these are actions we do as readers to make sense of the text that we're reading. In Scarborough's reading rope, they've sectioned it off into two sections. So word recognition, so development of those skills, we want those to become automatic, and then language comprehension. So what are we doing as we think about reading to become more increasingly strategic with it? So in Scarborough's reading rope, word recognition, they talk about these three strands: phonological awareness, decoding, and sight reading, or sight recognition. So, as students become better at decoding, more and more words become words that they can recognize by sight. When we think over to the benchmark assessments, systems of strategic actions, a lot of those word recognition pieces are found within the thinking within the text piece. So that's where we are solving words. That's where we're working on our fluency. That's where we're using our phonological information to use the information that's given on the page and help us solve words. We're learning how to correct our mistakes because, we sounded that out and I need to adjust that. So all of those pieces are within that thinking within the text part. And we uncover both of those pieces by listening to students read. In the language comprehension area of Scarborough's reading rope, that upper level of strands, that is where we're looking to find out about students' background knowledge, develop that background knowledge, help them build it. Vocabulary, we're strengthening that as texts become more and more complex. The language structures, so syntax, semantics, verbal reasoning, so those things like inferencing, metaphors, and then literary knowledge, like fiction and nonfiction. What does a newspaper look like compared to a poem, that kind of thing. If we're thinking about the benchmark assessment system, the areas of thinking beyond the text, that's when we are inferring and synthesizing, making connections and predicting. So we're also making ourselves understand the text. So we're gaining comprehension there. And thinking about the text is kind of like, was this the best way to write this text? If you're trying to tell me a story, then you probably shouldn't write it like a newspaper report. So we can critique and analyze things. What is the message that was shared in the story, and like why does the author want us to think that way? So both of them have very similar ideas at the end of things. We want students to be able to be fluent readers, be able to decode and read automatically. So we want that to be more and more seamless for them. But then we also want them to understand what they're reading. And as the texts go more and more complex, we want them to be able to build on their prior knowledge to go along with that. So if we think about Scarborough's reading rope, kind of that sweet spot where we see the upper part of the rope and the lower part of the rope connect, that is where we start to hear fluency. So students are able to read and they understand what they're reading. Same things happening in benchmark. We want students to be fluent, and we want them to be also to be understanding that text that they're working at. And they're drawing on a variety of these strategies, almost like they're solving words, they're inferring, they're summarizing, then they're predicting what's coming next. So they're bouncing around this wheel based on what they need to make sense of the text. And as students progress through, we want to make sure that they're always reading more challenging texts and learning and deepening those skills. And so we want that rope to tighten up. So we want to remove those gaps around it. But we also know that they're going to go backwards sometimes. So maybe they're able to make predictions early on in their reading stories, but now we want them to start predicting solutions. And they're like, ooh, that's a different skill for me. So we want to be able to make sure that students are always building their skill set in this. And we know that regardless of the model we're talking about, what's that goal? We want a skilled reader. And so there's lots of moving parts for us to be working with in our classrooms to help students get there. Yeah. So right now you probably know a lot about your students reading, or you know some things about students reading. And if you think about it right now, how do you know this? So what are the things you've been doing to find out about students reading? And then there's probably things we don't yet know about the students reading. So how might we come to learn about this more? So again, that's where our actions of gathering evidence in our classroom are, that's our responsibility in the classroom is, but then we have a lot of ways that we can gain this evidence. When we think about evidence, we are probably listening to students read. We have them filling out graphic organizers for us. Maybe we're having some small group conversations with kids. We're listening in to two kids talk about what happened in a story. So those are all the things that kids may be doing, and we can classify them by the mode of which we're collecting that evidence. So When students are doing things in the class, we are then attuned to what are we watching for? As they're talking in our classrooms, what are we listening for? What skills do they have? What behaviors do they have? What understandings do they have? Or what do they have need support in learning? And also, what am I gathering? So they're representing their understanding of reading the text. So maybe there are sometimes I'm going to be looking at products that I'll be collecting for students. Now this triangle looks pretty balanced here, but really in actual fact, when we have a collection of students in our classroom, we don't need to collect identical information for every student. We will have, as long as we are looking at observation, conversations, and products for gathering that information, we can have more observations for one kid and less products. Some kids, we might have lots of products and we just have limited conversations. So it's okay, just as long as we're finding out information about the goal we're working towards.
I was just noticing, Pam, it's Lori.
Hi, Lori, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, how are you? But just looking at this, and I know sometimes when we're trying to collect our observations and conversations that it doesn't always have to be in that one-on-one setting. Like it's in your chart there, it looks like it could be in small groups. It could be even during whole group. It could be when you're stopping by their desk, right? So on that one-on-one. So
yeah. And sometimes even when they're walking around the playground with you at recess time and they're chatting about the read aloud book that you're talking about, and they're starting to make predictions about what's going to happen in the next chapter, you're like, I'm going to use that because I've gained it there.
Different experiences really give us different opportunities to collect and not to feel like we have to every day, hit 6 students one-on-one. There can be lots of different opportunities.
Absolutely. And we're going to gain that through those classroom experiences. But the hard part I find is that we are sometimes inundated with volume of information. So I'm getting lots of information, but what's my real focus that I'm paying attention to now? Because I want to know what's really the right next move for this student. So we're going to talk today about how do we manage this information a bit more. So we are going to be gathering lots of information, and then you're thinking, well, what's my real focus for learning here? So there are times during the year that a standardized assessment like the benchmark assessment will help us give clarity to that. So our benchmark assessment systems are structured on this system of strategic action. So what students are doing as they're engaging with text. So what are they doing within the text? What are they beyond the text and thinking about the text? And the literacy continuum is a resource that's in the kits themselves. So it's a tool that we can help us go deeper into understanding what we might have to teach, not necessarily how to teach it, but what is the right place to start with students and where do we take them? And I know some schools have extra copies of these literacy continuums. So if you today, after you have a look through this presentation with us, it may be a way for you just to go and crack in there okay, I think I know what this book is meaning, because it's a big brick. There's a lot of information in it. So if we think about, we're in that benchmark assessment system time. And so what are we noticing when we've done this assessment? So we're going to notice things from the oral read part, and we're going to get some scores from that. So accuracy, self-correction, and fluency will be scores that we can use. But really, we're all talking about that within the text part. So we're gaining lots of information about them. And summarizing, it doesn't come through in the oral read part, but it does come through in that comprehension conversation where we are using that rubric to score how students are understanding or comprehending the text. So within the text, Laura, you and I were talking about this today, why is the summarizing in the blue section, thinking within the text and thinking not in the thinking beyond the text?
Right. I was just going to mention that I always kind of thought of summarizing to be one of those strategies that I would chunk with predicting and synthesizing and all those things. But when we were talking and you kind of mentioned you're really, really using the book and relying on the book for summarizing. And one great thing about fast assessments is I love that kids are allowed to use the book to for the comprehension conversation. So they are really looking into the book for the information. So they are really within that text. Whereas the green strategies, it's more of they're having to dig a little deeper and bring in some of their own background knowledge and understanding to pull out information. So
Right.
that conversation with you really helped clarify that for me.
Yeah. And you tease that out of me. I'm like, well, because the answer's in the book. So, within the book, that makes sense to me now. And I think we always get bent out of shape about the making connections piece is like the experiences they have limited. We can help them activate those experiences they've had, making those connections made, but maybe I need to build those connections and maybe I have to highlight that in my instructional practice. So if we want kids to be thinking beyond the text, what are those skills we're answering, asking them, what questions are we asking them so we can get at their thinking? Do they need more time to build those connections? Or how do I figure out getting to them to access those connections they already have? And then the last part of the assessment is to get about the thinking about the text. And really, this really doesn't come into effect into the later parts of BAS 1 and then into BAS 2. So because we don't learn to think critically and analyze, like that's a pretty complex thought. So benchmark, this doesn't happen until after level K, I believe. So really in that BAS 2 kit, you're going to see those questions be much more evident. So if we think about the comprehension conversation prompts that we're using, we look at the sections, the key understandings we're looking at. So it's broken down by that within the text, beyond the text, and about the text. So every time we start the conversation with the students, we are asking them to summarize the text. Then we move on to those beyond the text questions that really focus in on those inferring and making connections pieces. And then the last part about the text is that analyzing, critiquing. So one thing I think, Lori, you've done and I've done is like we've gone back and started to look at the questions that are being posed in this.
Yeah, that really helped me to see what questions are really getting to them to infer. What types of questions are they asking to get students to make connections? And by pulling those out, then I know what kind of questions I can ask my students, whether it's in small group or whole group instruction. What are the things that I can ask to kind of build their understanding around these strategies?
Right. And because like once you go through like a class set of the assessments, like this might be one way that you kind of help yourself understand where the strengths are or where the next steps are for the learning. And I took this is one of the documents that's available on the SharePoint. It's basically the wheel just stretched out in table form. And just thinking that if I wanted to think, what's the next step for students if I use those reading assessments? And I was thinking back to the classroom experiences. What were the areas where there was really like I should be spending some time on this? And if I looked at my class, this may be a scenario what happens is that you've got a smattering of where everybody is, but there tends to be one area where I can start to be thinking like, you know what, you're inferring is going to be my tier 1 whole class instruction. I'm going to be spending some time digging into this. And that green box, I've just used the benchmark, the literacy continuum's definition of what inferring is, going beyond the literal meaning of the text to think about what's not here, but what is implied by the writer. And I know when we get into the Nelson literacy books, I used to always like these because these books are organized by reading strategy. So there is sections in here that are basically about inference. So you can go in there and look for their definition of it as well. And I know our new resource Under One Sun to go along with those, they are organized by the same thing. So there's like in this one, there's a making inference section here that you can look at that resource and use those questions to help you dig deeper into what student learning is. But I also like something was nagging at the back of my mind that inferring may be like really upfront. This is what a lot of kids need, but connected to that is always that making connections piece. You know, can they see what that hidden meaning is in the text easily? And maybe because they've had that connection to something in their own world or another book that they've experienced or something we've done in science or social studies. So I'm going to keep that making connection kind of hanging around there. I'm not ready to let it go. But I know that through the experiences in our classroom, we're going to be able to activate or build those connections. So going back into those comprehension conversation prompts, I went back and just flipped through the spiral book because I had one handy, but you can also look at the digital pieces in the SharePoint. And like these were the questions that were asked in the BAS 2 kit. So what lesson does blank learn? Why is blank important? What's the most important message in the book? And then the making connections questions. Talk about how this lesson makes you think about how you can get things that you want, or how does this message of this book make you think about what you do in your own life? So there seemed to be like quite the pattern to these questions. There wasn't a lot of differences. It all boils down to, what do you think is the writer's message? And what does the message of this book mean for your life? So if I kind of go into this planning piece thinking, I really want kids to be better at answering these two questions, what am I going to do to help them do that? Because it's going to help them be better readers, regardless of the text that they're reading and regardless of the level that they're reading. And so then I got to thinking, well, what were the answers to those questions? So in the BAS 2 kit, so I looked at the fiction text and the nonfiction text and just scanned through and said, like, what were the expected answers for the students from levels S through to W? So there was things like help the ones you love, responsibility, provide a solution, don't just complain. Helping others is important, persevering through challenges, stand up for what you believe in, gather information before you judge. Okay, so then I was like, okay, do my students actually have the vocabulary to answer these questions? I'm not really sure. What's their background knowledge about these topics? And when you think about authors' messages, there's also lots of times themes to explore. So now what do I do with this information? They're struggling with this and I've got questions myself. Where can I go to maybe help myself understand inferring more? So that's what I'm going to go dig into that literacy continuum book. And like I said, it's a brick. It has lots of sections to it. The back section is the baby blue color, and it is all about guided reading. So that's where I'm going to be focusing today to find this inferring section. I made it green because it's green on the circle on the web. But this book also has information about writing. It has work on phonics, word study, all kinds of information. So, but we're just going to stay in one section today. And I know Teresa was saying that she's used this a lot for helping her make sense of, like, when you're modifying things for English language students, like this actually helped her find the language to do that. The book was kind of helpful for this.
Yeah,
so,
I saw too a lot of teachers pulling out this when they were doing their where to next and how to get there chart for some of their target students. A lot of teachers were pulling out this book and digging into it and saying, okay, I know my student needs to work on inferring. What would be a good next step for them? So that's something that could put in that chart. That was something they can build into their teaching, and also next steps and report card comments too are a helpful tool.
Exactly. And we think about this being built on student actions. So what are those behaviors we want them to have? What understandings do we want them to have? So it's going to be a whole list of things because reading is complex. There's going to be lots of different scenarios. So it's guiding us to say, what am I noticing they already have? What do I figure out, like, ooh, they don't have that yet. So I'm going to make some very explicit actions to teach this. And how might I go ahead about supporting students that kind of have it, but need a little bit more? And I think this is where that continuum comes in, is that students have been inferring since the early part of the continuum of ABCD books, but now we're into these S level books. They're still inferring. I need to support them to be supported so they can infer in more complex situations or deal with bigger issues, or maybe the themes are a little bit more deep. So how do I go about doing that? So this is what a page in this continuum would look like. So I've just picked the level S to look at this. and they're color coded. So there's this green pages that, like green, always talk about beyond the text. And this is the inferring section. So you can see there are lots of dots here. Lots of them. So that can be a bit overwhelming. So I'm going to go into this, like, what do my students need right now? So what do I see is like, yeah, they've got some of these behaviors. They understand some of these things. Where can I go deeper with this to support them? And color is kind of an important thing. So Lori, I know you were talking with some teachers and they were like, what's the red mean? We discovered.
Yeah, so it's kind of neat because there are so many dots. And when you see the red ones, that's when something, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, new is being introduced. So if the dot is black, then it's something that's been already in the previous level. And the red dots are new things that are being built upon.
Exactly. So like making inferences about setting to help and understand the story. They've been doing that since they've read a book, right? They're looking, if the page gets dark, they're like, ooh, maybe it's nighttime, or maybe it's a little scary. Like if they're looking at pictures. Then when it comes to the vocabulary part of it, you know, they talked about how the forest was dark and silent. Like, ooh, I think maybe might be something I have to prepare myself for in this story. So they've been working on this for a long time. It never goes away. We're still going to be looking at that setting to go there. But maybe when we get into these red icons here, so infer beliefs, customs, and perspectives of people who live in other cultures. So this will be the first time that they're reading books where we should be expecting to start inferring about, you know, books from other cultures. So they will probably need more support on this inferring behavior than they would about the inferring about settings. So just to kind of landscape where we are. So some of us out there like Post-it notes when we plan. So I chose some Post-it notes. So I was just reading through this list multiple times, and I was just trying to find Post-it notes that, like, the behaviors and understandings that were kind of speaking to me about where kids might be. So talk about character traits and feelings, talk about the causes for these traits and problems that a character experiences. Understand problems of challenging situations. Now, if I'm in this, you know, junior level grades, grade 5 and 6, we are talking about challenging situations in the environment. Maybe there's some more stories that we are talking about in our classroom. The news we're reading, maybe some of these are a little bit more challenging. Maybe we want to get into comparing inferences with a group. Like this might be new for students to actually be talking and debating about their inferences. Okay, maybe now we're starting to talk about human themes and issues that affect human populations across the world. That's one of those red ones. So I put a little star in here. This is the first time that we're talking deeply about that. Okay, and then infer important information from familiar contexts as well as topics more distant from the student's typical experience. So maybe I can bring some things from science or history, different parts of the world. So this, you know, I want them to have connections to who they are and the life they're living, but I also want to expand their world on this. So this is just kind of like my brainstorming here, not doing all of them. I'm picking the ones that I think we can handle next in our classroom. The other thing I did with this is that because I worked in level S, I wanted to confirm that this was still going to be good thinking, good planning for the other levels above this. So I went in and just like scanned through, am I seeing the same points here? And so because we need time to develop this. So yes, I confirmed that all of these, like, to understand the problems of challenging situation exists in S to V. Probably exists beyond that too, but I know for sure in that band where my students are that this is what they need. It's okay. I'm not overreaching, you know, too far into their challenge level of the text, that this is still something that's going to be relatable to the text that they're working with. Okay, so if I'm going into this thinking my goal is to focus on inferring and making connections, and really boils down to, can kids answer this question? What is the writer's message? And what does the message of the text mean for your life or your growing knowledge? So this is going to be my learning focus for the next while. And I've kind of set myself a little path here. How might I go about doing this? I'm going to think about what learning goals we can create, My success criteria will build. Anchor charts is something that it's nice to have to refer to as we build this knowledge together. Where am I going to find the information and resources? And how am I going to do this? So what's my gradual release of responsibility? I'm going to definitely model some pieces, but what are we going to do as shared activities? What are we going to do for if it happens to be small group instruction time? What might that look like? And how will I know when students are independently inferring and making connections and showing lots of comprehension here? It's kind of like the path they wanted to take. You with me?
Yeah, and I'm watching the chat here too. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop it in.
Yep, Teresa's there too. So I'm going to start with the learning goals and success criteria first. So remember, I've got my little pack of Post-it notes here. So I'm going to use those to help me think about how do I make this clear to what we're actually going to do in the classroom. So we are learning to uncover the author's message or infer and discuss it so that we can better understand what we are reading. Okay. And I really made it the teacher decision to focus on the author's message. There's lots we can infer about settings, we can infer about people, we can infer about solutions, but I really wanted to get to that author's message piece. So took some time to craft some success criteria. So I can identify the feelings the characters exhibit. And then once we practice that a little bit, I'm going to give me some evidence of that. So if you see any gray text here, this may be what I start with, and then we're going to add in eventually, well, what's your evidence of that? I can describe the actions the characters took, beginning, middle, and end, because I think maybe change might be happening, and explain why. I can name the traits the characters demonstrated connected to their feelings and actions. Well, I'm not pulling these things out of the air. I'm using these Post-it notes. I'm going back and saying, if these are behaviors and understandings, this is where I'm getting them from. I want to use the word traits. I want to be talking about feelings, what the actions people are taking. So I'm going through and trying to put these Post-it notes to use here. These will help me figure out, questions I'm going to ask, what books I'm going to look for. So it was pretty easy for me to find place in the success criteria for some of them, and other ones didn't seem to be fitting. And I was like, oh, that's going to be okay. We'll figure out what to do with them next. But this is a lot of success criteria. So, everybody's going to craft it the way you are in your class. And I'm not plastering these on the walls right away. I intentionally put them on like sentence strip pieces because we're going to build this over time. So once we do some activities, so in our activities, these are the learning activities I'm going to go and find. So if I'm reading a book, I may look at, when I read through this book today, I really want to focus on feelings. I want people to articulate the feelings the characters are exhibiting. So that's my focus. So then we can build, this is going to help us to infer that author's message. This is also going to be the language of my feedback. So when I'm talking to Lori and Teresa and their small group instruction, I'm going to, and Teresa says, well, I think that character's honest. And Lori's like, I agree with that. I think he was honest. And I know that because he told the truth and he gave back what they found. And I'm like, wow, that's great. You use the word honesty to show that character's trait. I'm going to use that language to give feedback to the kids. So then I'm starting to figure out, I can tell if they're making gains in this or if they're stalling here, or do I need to do some other more instructional actions coming in here? Okay, so I've kind of got this in my mind. This is where I want to go. So then it's really important that we make sure we're sharing this or we're using this language in our classrooms, because if students don't know that learning target that we're working toward, they're just hearing us like, okay, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. They need to see that what we're sharing with them is actually impacting the learning, the skill they're trying to develop. So how you choose to make that visible in the classroom, I love that. It's your choice. You can use your screens that you have. Are you a chartboard person? Do you have near-point copies for kids? It's your way of articulating that, but it's just as long as they know what the target is and how they get there, through the conversation you have with them, and it's very specific to them. Okay, so now that I've got my learning goals and success criteria, I'm starting to develop those lessons that are going along. I like to have, so my learning activities, I need to have a record of what that learning activity is. So often that becomes visible in that, like an anchor chart. So if we've read some books and we're talking about feelings that are in the books, and I realize that my kids are saying words like mad, sad, and glad a lot, maybe my lessons are going to be then like, let's explore some other languages to describe the feelings of mad. How do we know that? That's going to help us with our inference piece. Because always these things have to go back to our goal of, can kids figure out how to answer the author's message? What is that message? And it comes from those feelings and actions that we have in the books. So again, these you'll share them the way you do in your classroom, but like charts, character traits. Lots of schools talk about those when they're assemblies. As we read books, maybe I'm going to build, like every book we read, what's the message and theme we've uncovered, and we build this over time. Okay. And then also, if I'm thinking about those success criteria, a lot of this is happening through talk. And I've intentionally put those words in my success criteria, knowing that I don't have to always have these things written down. Like kids don't have to write this. They can talk about it with each other. They can talk about it with me. So I'm using words like describe, discuss, explain, share, and know that talk probably has to happen a lot first before they can write a written response. So Teresa, I wonder if you could give me stars for using sentence starters. Yeah, she's having mute problems right now, but she'll figure it out. But so I've just kind of written these sentence starters where like the character said, character did this and said that, and I think the character was feeling this. There you are. Hi, Teresa.
Sorry. Hi. Having computer trouble today. Yeah, so being supporting their ELL students, the sentence starters are very important because it gives them the wording so they know what they have to say and they can fill in kind of the blanks. So that's what we're talking about. And I try to encourage all the time.
And it's just essential for them, but
for all our learners, they have to learn how to say it explicitly before they can say it, especially before they can ever write it. So having these up or having sentence starters for all students will be beneficial.
Yeah. So again, and this helps us give them that confidence too about how to go through and answer these questions, especially when we say, I want you to discuss the theme. So let's start with the author's message is blank. And then we can add another such. I know this because, like, you can keep building these sentence starters and you'll see kids go and read them, like, their eyes reading as they answer the question to go along with that. So if we think about resources, so how am I going to get at this? So again, if we want kids to be able to infer, go beyond the literal meaning of the text to think about what is not here, but is implied by the writer. So Nelson, they structure their whole programs based on the reading strategies. So inference is one, making connections is another, visualization is another one. So you can dig into these things, and even if it's not the unit on inferencing, can you use any of the information in there to look at a text in a new way by saying, I'm going to look at it through that whole lens of inferring, getting to that message. And you also have those individual little reading cards. The newest resource that's available in LKDSB are the Under One Sun resources. So they have those reading cards as well, or little books if it's lower grades. And in the teacher guide, again, great ways to answer the questions. And then the Nelson, you may not even you might use the story in Nelson, but the teacher guides are great because they help you phrase a question. Right. So if you look on the side panels on the inference ones, you can read through and just say, okay, maybe I don't want to use this text. I'm going to use a different text, but I'm going to use these same types of questions to go with students. But the key thing is that if I go back to my literacy continuum post-it notes, is that I'm going to be looking to understand problems of challenging situations. And so this resource, the Take Act for Reconciliation, This is something that we know is something that our country's taking steps to do, and education's taken a big step into this. But these books are so great about them. They have lots, they're meant for the junior intermediate reading level. There's 4 of them, and if in those red boxes, every school has these red boxes, and in them, I think there's 15 copies of each book. And there's all kinds of different reading tasks, samples in them. Some of them are 1 page, some of them are 2 pages long. Great graphics. So there are some great ones, like there's one called My Mother's Story. And so just a 1-page piece. And so this you can infer feelings from this. What's the author's message from this? So another great resource for us to access. And also for my post-it notes, I want to make sure I'm finding books maybe from different parts of the world. My science curriculum books, those social studies resources I have, I can use that to work on this skill of inferring. And my favorite, picture books. So if we think about these picture books are bringing that equity lens. So what are we having in our classroom library? Do students see themselves in the picture books that we have? Are we creating opportunities for students to understand diversity with their book collections here? And I know that Deep Netting with Dad is one that's coming to your schools. We could just package them up. There's a little collection of books written by Indigenous authors with Indigenous themes, and Jigging for Halibut is another one that's coming to your schools. So take a look for those. They're all packaged up and ready to be headed out when we visit schools.
One of the things too I love about these books is that even though they're storybooks, a lot of the messages and topics in them can be pretty deep. So although you might only, touch the surface with primary students, even if they're rereading a book, now that when they're in grade 8, they can maybe dig a little deeper into some of the meaning in the text that maybe they didn't before.
Absolutely. Yeah, this Smoky Nights is like, there's a lot of things going on in that one. And I would save that one for like late junior intermediate books, right? So there's lots of them available in there. I follow Sharon Drummond in our school board. She's on Instagram and she's doing a project 365 days of teacher tips. And like, I love all of her book selections, and she's right there with all books about making sure students understand diversity and inclusion, equity. She's great to follow for the newest in book selections. And it's important for us as teachers. We're in a position where we can bring this diversity to our students. So this is something we've shared over the last few years. 2018, I was looking for the updated version, and it is American, but it does talk about the publication of books, what was available to children. And so from the publisher's perspective, 50% of the books that they publish have the main character as being a white person. 27% are animals or other. So if we think about diversity, we've got over 75% of the books available that were published in that year that are focused on something that maybe not representing the students in our classroom. And this is a great image to explore and think about. You can see there's lots of mirrors here. So we see that sometimes if you're a certain character, you're going to see yourself reflected in many stories, and others may see their picture reflected in limited ways or small ways or even broken ways. So again, we have the opportunity to bring diversity to our classroom through the books that we share with students. So if I think about where we are, and so that collection of resources, like I'll go back and just like, everybody's got books, everybody's got resources in our system. We've got online resources going on. But if we just go back and look at things with a different lens of like, I love this book, but I've always used it for visualization. Maybe if I go back and look at it again, we can look at it by thinking about inferring, going along with that lens. I always like to recommend Teachers Page, Teaching Kids News is an online resource that gives a couple of times a week. There is a media story told, always about something current. and they're short, but they're Canadian and they reference world events happening too, but they have great questions on the bottom as well. And they're that newspaper focus. So that is called teachingkidsnews.ca. And so just now that you've kind of started to think about what I want the kids to learn, how will I know if they're being successful? So building those activities around the success criteria. I've got things like anchor charts that might be built. I've got a collection of resources. Then we've got like this time to think, well, some of them I'm going to do as modeled lessons, and some of them I'm going to do as shared lessons. And sometimes in the guided reading, I'll be doing this inferring with certain kids, but in guided reading, I may be also cycling back to doing different things with kids. So maybe I have some kids that really need to still work on summarizing. In that small group instructional time, I will break away from this inferring lessons and give them what they need in that small group instruction time. And then the goal is, like, when they're independently reading, are they able to infer, piece together the author's message from the evidence that they're gathering from the characters' feelings, the actions they're taking. They've started to discuss themes and start to connect them with other stories. And we're talking about these things, we're questioning things and trying to build that knowledge base that students have. Because if they don't have that background knowledge, or they don't have connections to draw on, we can help bring that to them through the experiences in our classroom. So we're going to spend some time doing this, and you are in the architect of the classroom. You are going to determine what that time period is, and after some time, then it might be time to move into that assessment of learning phase. You're constantly gathering information, but maybe I just want to pause for a moment, give students a text, have them read it, and ask them these questions. What is the writer's message? And what does the message of this text mean for your life or your growing knowledge? And they can share that in a written way. We can have a conversation about it. So you can, determine that assessment path for you and your students. Because if we think back to where we started, is that we want to get our students to be at this point where they're having all of these skills, these actions working for them so that they can make sense of the text and they are fluent readers. So are we working on, we've really focused in on inferring, or we're, if we're looking at the Scarborough's rote piece, we're looking at that verbal reasoning piece. We're not just stuck there. We're actually working on all these other things at the same time, but it's the thing that we're giving feedback about, thing that we're going to assess about. When we write our term one report cards, we can go in and say that, Lori and Teresa are able to share the author's message. They give details about what the characters' feelings and the actions they took to share, this is the lesson they want us to learn. We've worked on that, and you can confidently say, I know that student has made gains in that. Oh, any questions there for us? I think we're coming to the end of our slide deck here. With that. Okay. So any last words from you, Lori, and thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
Putting her on the spot.
Sorry, I was just looking, I had seen a resource that I feel like our EDI team had been putting together of books. And
okay.
I just couldn't remember where it was. And I was thinking if I could find the link, it would be great to share right now, but I'm not sure if I just saw work in progress or if it was completed and to be shared yet. So I was just having a look. So just maybe
awesome.
your eyes
Yes.
open for that.
I think we're going to be sharing everything. All their sessions are going to be on.
Can you just put it in the chat?
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Yay. Thanks so
There
much.
you go.
Yeah. So we'll also share this on our blog too, like a kind of summary of things.
Perfect.
But how we all troll around and looking for information. This is one that this graphic spoke to me a lot about how The difference between equal and equitable, like we all want our students to grow and thrive. So it's just a matter of finding what is it that they need. So some kids might need that small group instruction to help them with summarizing. Other kids, we just need the whole classics lesson, but summarizing, and then they can refine it. So we just have to, when we're talking about inference, what is it that kids need? They're going to need different experiences. So the variety that we can give them to focus on that. And I know we talked, today's focus is mostly about the comprehension piece, but we know that students still need to be working on building vocabulary and decoding and solving word pieces. So in that literacy continuum, there's actually some resources there about phonics, spelling, word study that just kind of give you a landscape, what's kind of like the grade continuum. And then at the end of every guided reading section, like so level M is the one I'm showing here, after you've gone through the within, beyond, and about text, there's a section for word work. So if you're at level S, what is the word work that you might do to support that learner? If you're at level V, what would be the word work that you would work on to support them? So things like reading more multisyllable words, spelling patterns, plurals, that sort of thing. So it kind of gives you removes the guessing away from it.
Charts on the cover page, right? Sorry.
So the strategic action chart. So if we go back a few pages, like
yeah, I just posted too. I believe that it's in the SharePoint. It's in the summary forms folder. So there's a folder that says summary forms. I think that's what it.
Yeah, I think it's actually, it might be called Next Step, System of Strategic Action.
I think that's in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought she meant.
Yeah.
It was. I was looking for actually where those next steps were. All of those steps start on page 410, but you were talking about the actual chart.
Oh, the chart. Yeah. So anyway, so that's just give you something to think about today. If we go back to that Scarborough's rope piece and we think about our system of strategic action, we just really want students to be thinking deeply about text, and how do we slowly nudge them into that by giving them experiences where they can infer, make connections, synthesize, putting together that information, what they already know. They learned something new. Now they synthesize that new information. But we are here to help. And so if you have questions about reading and benchmark, we have instructional coaches out there that they are in a lot of math classrooms, but they love supporting literacy as well. So we're available for you.
We do.
Yeah. It's nice to talk about reading every once in a while. But thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll stay on the line here a little bit longer if you need to pose questions. But thanks for joining us.